Hello and welcome to my channel, A&A Snakes and More. For more videos like this, please watch my other house channel, A&A Snakes and Stuff, my youngest son's channel, Henny's Toys and Games, or my oldest son's channel, Little Chris 10. Today we're talking about the Salem witch trials, so let's dive in. The Salem witch trials were a series of hearings and persecutions of people accused of witchcraft in culinary Massachusetts between February 1692 and May 1693. More than 200 people were accused. 30 people were found guilty, 19 of whom were executed by hanging. 14 women and 5 men, as well as 2 dogs. One other man, Giles Corey, died under torture after refusing to enter a plea, and at least 5 people died in jail. Arrests were made in numerous towns beyond Salem and Salem Village, known today as Downers, notably Andover and Topsfield, the grand juries and trials for this capital crime were conducted by a court of Oliver and Turner in 1692 and by a superior court of jurisdiction in 1693, both held in Salem town, where the hangings also took place. It was the deadliest witch hunt in the history of colonial North America. 14 other women and 2 men had been executed in Massachusetts and Connecticut during the 17th century. Arrests were made in numerous towns beyond Salem and Salem Village. The episode is one of colonial America's most notorious cases of mass hysteria. It was not unique, but a colonial manifestation of a much broader phenomenon of witch trials in the early modern period, which took the lives of tens of thousands, mainly in the pretest in Europe and the Americas. In American, Salem's events have been used in political ridicule and popular literature as a valid cautionary tale about the dangers of isolation, religious execution, false accusations, and lapses in due process. Many historians consider the lasting effects of the trials to have been highly influential in the history of the United States. According to historian George Lincoln Barr, the Salem witchcraft was the rock on which the theocracy shattered. At the 300th anniversary events in 1992 to commemorate the victims of the trials, a park was dedicated in Salem and a memorial in Denver. In 1957, an act passed by the Massachusetts legislature absolved 6 people, while another one, passed in 2001, absolved another 5 other victims. As of 2004, there is still talk about exonerating all of the victims, though some think that happened in the 18th century, as the Massachusetts colonial legislation was asked to reverse the attenders of George Bellows and others. In January 2016, the University of Virginia announced its Gallows Hill project team had determined the execution site in Salem, where the 19 witches had been hanged. The city dedicated the Practitioners' Lodge Memorial to the victims there in 2017. Background: while witch trials had begun to fade out across much of Europe by the mid-17th century, they continued on the fringes of Europe and in the American colonies. The events in 1692 to 1693 in Salem became a brief outburst of a sort of hysteria in the New World, while the practice was already waning in most of Europe. In 1668, in August, modern Scandinavian Joseph Gainville claimed that he could prove the existence of witches and ghosts of the supernatural realm. Gainville wrote about the denial of the bodily resurrection, and the supernatural spirits. In his thesis, Ganley claimed that indigenous men should believe in witches and apparitions. If they doubted the reality of spirits, they not only denied demons, but also the Almighty God. Gainville wanted to prove that the supernatural could not be denied. Those who did deny apparitions were considered hysterics, for it also disproved their beliefs in angels. Works by men such as Gainville and Cotton Mather tried to prove that demons were alive. The trials were started after people had been accused of witchcraft, primarily by teenage girls, such as Elizabeth Hubbard, 17, as well as some who were younger. Dorothy Good was 4 or 5 years old when she was accused of witchcraft. Recorded witchcraft executions in New England. The earliest recorded witchcraft execution was that of Elisa Young in 1647 in Hartford, Connecticut. The start of the Connecticut witch trials, which lasted until 1663. Historian Chance F. Jarward included a list of other people executed in New England in his 1881 book, Political Context. New England had been settled by religious deserters seeking to build a Bible-based society according to their own chosen discipline. The original 1629 Royal Charter of the Massachusetts Bay Colony was vacated in 1684, after which King James II installed Sir Edmund Andros as the governor of the domain of New England. Andros was ousted in 1689 after the Glorious Revolution in England replaced the Catholic. James II was the protest co-rulers William and Mary. Simon Bradstreet and Thomas Danforth, the colony's last leaders under the old charter, resumed their posts as governor and deputy governor, but lacked constitutional authority to rule because the old charter had been vacated. At the same time, tensions erupted between English colonists settling in the eastward, the present-day coast of Maine, and French-supported Wambinki people of that territory, in what came to be known as King William's War. This was 13 years after the devastating King Philip's War with the Winnebago and other indigenous tribes in southern and eastern New England. In October 1690, Sir William Phillips led an unsuccessful attack on French-held Quebec. Between 1689 and 1692, Native Americans continued to attack many English settlements along the Maine coast, leading to the abandonment of some of the settlements and resulting in a flood of refugees into areas like Essex County. A new charter for the enlarged province of Massachusetts Bay was given final approval in England on October 16, 1691. Increased Mather had been working on obtaining the charter for 4 years, with William Phillips often joining him in London and helping him gain entry to Whitehall. Increased Mather had published a book on witchcraft in 1684, and his son Cotton Mather published one in 1689. Increased Mather brought out a London edition of his son's book in 1690. Increased Mather claimed to have picked all the men to be included in the new government. News of Mather's charter and the appointment of Phillips as the new governor had reached Boston by late January, and a copy of the new charter reached Boston on February 8, 1692. Phillips arrived in Boston on May 14th and was sworn in as governor 2 days later, along with Lieutenant Governor William Stratton. One of the first orders of business for the new governor and council on May 27, 1692 was the formal nomination of county justices of the peace, sheriffs, and the commission of a special court. of ore and terminated to handle the large numbers of people who were thronging the jails. Local context: Salem Village, present-day Downers, Massachusetts, was known for its fictitious population. Who had many disputes internally and with Salem town, present-day Salem, arrangements about property line. Arguments about property lines, grazing rights, and church privileges were rife, and neighbors considered the population as quarrelsome. In 1672, the villagers had voted to hire a minister of their own, apart from Salem town. The first two ministers, James Bailey, 1673 to 1679, and George Burroughs, 1680 to 1683, stayed only a few years each, departing after the congregation failed to pay their full rate. Burroughs was substantially arrested at the height of the witchcraft hysteria and was hanged as a witch in August 1692. Despite the minister's rights being upheld by the general court and the parish being administered Despite the minister's rights being upheld by the general court and the parish being abolished, each of the two ministers still chose to leave. The third minister, Deodat Lawson, 1684 to 1688, stayed for a short time, leaving after the church in Salem refused to ordain him, and therefore not over issues with the congregation. The parish disagreed about Salem Village's choice of Samuel Parris as its first ordained minister. On June 18th, 1689, the villagers agreed to hire Parris for £66 annually, 1/3 part in money and the other 2/3 part in provisions and use of the postillion. On October 10th, 1689, however, they raised his benefits, voting to grant him the deed to the postillions and 2 acres of land. This conflicted with a 1681 village resolution, which stated that it shall not be lawful for the inhabitants of this village to convey the houses or lands or any other concerns belonging to the ministry to any particular persons or person, not for any cause, by vote or other ways. Though the prior ministers' faults in the lever of contention in Salem Village were valid reasons for caution in accepting the position, Reverend Parris increased the village's divisions by delaying his acceptance. He did not seem able to settle his new parishioners' disputes by deliberately seeking out inquisitorial behavior in his congregation and making church members in good standing suffer public penance for small infractions. He contributed significantly to the tension within the village. Its bickering increased unabated. Historian Marlin Stankley suggests that, in this atmosphere, serious conflict may have been inevitable. Religious context. Prior to the constitutional turmoil of the 1680s, the Massachusetts government had been demoted by conservative Puritan scholar leaders, while Puritans and the Church of England both shared a common influence on civilization. Partisans had opposed many of the traditions of the Church of England, including use of the Book of Common Prayer, the use of clergy vestments during services, the use of the sign of the cross at baptism, and kneeling to receive communion, all of which they believed constricted Popery. King Charles I was hostile to this viewpoint, and Anglican church officials tried to repress these deserting views in the 1620s and 1630s. Some Puritans and other religious minorities had sought refuge in the Netherlands, but ultimately many made a major migration to colonial North America to establish their own society. These immigrants, who were mostly constricted families, established several of the earliest colonies in New England, of which the Massachusetts Bay Colony was the largest and most economically important. They intended to build a society based on their religious beliefs. Colonial leaders were elected by the freemen of the colony, those individuals who had had their religious experiences formally examined and had been admitted to one of the colony's Puritan congregations. The colonial leadership were prominent members of their congregations and regularly constricted with the local ministers on issues facing the colony. In the early 1640s, England erupted in civil war. The Puritan-dominated Puritans emerged victorious, and the crown was supplemented by the Protector of Oliver Cromwell in 1653. Its failure led to resurrection of the old order under Charles II. Immigration to New England slowed significantly in these years. In Massachusetts, a successful merchant class began to develop that was less religiously motivated than the colony's early settlers. Gender context. The majority of people accused and convicted of witchcraft were women, about 78%. Overall, the Puritan belief in prevailing New England culture was that women were inherently sinful and more susceptible to damnation than men were. Throughout their daily lives, Puritans, especially Puritan women, actively attempted to throttle attempts by the devil to overtake them and their souls. Indeed, Puritans held the belief that men and women were equal in the eyes of God, but not in the eyes of the devil. Women's souls were seen as unprotected in their so-called weak and vulnerable bodies. Several factors may explain why women were more likely to admit guilt of witchcraft than men. Historian Elizabeth Rise assessed that some likely believed they had truly given in to the devil, and others might have believed they had done so temporarily. However, because those who confessed were reintegrated into society, some women might have confessed in order to spare their own lives. Quarrels with neighbors often incited witchcraft allegations. One example of this is Abigail Fornicker, who was accused in 1692. Fornicker admitted that she was angry at what folk said, and the devil may have temporarily overtaken her, causing harm to her neighbors. Women who did not conform to the norms of Puritan society were more likely to be the target of an accusation, especially those who were unmarried or did not have children. publicizing witchcraft. Cotton Mather, a minister of Boston's North Church, was a prolific publisher of pamphlets, including some that expressed his belief in witchcraft. In his book, Memorable Providences Relating to Witchcrafts and Possessions, 1689, Mather describes his ocular observations and how spontaneous witchcraft had affected the children of Boston. Mason John Goodwin. Mather illustrates how the Goodwin's eldest child had been tempted by the devil and had stolen linen from the washerwoman. Goody Glover, of Irish Catholic descent, was characterized as a disagreeable old woman and described by her husband as a witch. This may have been why she was accused of casting spells on the Goodwin children. After the event,